Objects and meaning, the mythic lens. What if a simple object, a lightsaber, a dusty chest, or even a droid could hold the weight of an entire universe's meaning? In myths, objects are never just objects. They become vessels of significance, bridging the tangible and the transcendent. Jordan Peterson argues that humans instinctively assign meanings to objects, a process rooted in our myth-making psyche. A lightsaber isn't merely a weapon. It's a symbol of legacy, moral choice, and the struggle between order and chaos. This duality object as physical thing and metaphysical signifier is in the heartbeat of mythology. Why do myths across cultures imbue swords, rings, or chalices with cosmic power? Because they reflect our innate drive to turn chaos into meaning. Carl Jung took this further, proposing that certain symbol archetypes reside in humanity's collective unconsciousness. Remember this word, collective unconsciousness, because we'll be unpacking this throughout all the different sections that we do today and in later podcasts. They tap into universal patterns, the hero's sword, the mother's vessel, the trickster's tool. Myths weaponize these archetypes to make abstract truths feel real. But here's the twist. Does the object create the meaning, or does the meaning create the object? When Rey hesitates to take Luke's lightsaber, she's not rejecting a tool, she's wrestling with her destiny. Now I apply this to Star Wars. The Jedi Order downfall begins when they treated lightsabers as mere weapons, not symbols of their covenant with the Force. They lost meaning. Similarly, Snoke's Starkiller Base, a planet weaponized into machine, embodies modernity's mythic crisis, reducing sacred symbols to disposable tools. Peter warns that degrading mythic meaning leads to nihilism, and Star Wars shows that alternative. So tell me, and this is whomever wants to participate first, what are the objects in your lives that hold hidden myths?
Great. Sure. It's a beautiful topic, and as you say, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I want to answer your question first, and at some point, just kind of talk about the larger context of it, because I think there's so much, because underneath it all is, how do we really seek meaning? What is meaning? How do we connect with what it means to live, right? Is kind of how I interpret it. But the objects in my life, I would have to say that have a lot of meaning are things from my childhood, actually. And I'll preface it with this, because and I'll, get into the specific objects, but during the lockdown and the pandemic, my eldest daughter was 8 years old at the time. And I believe one of the gifts of children is that we get to kind of relive our childhood, and for better or for worse. And in this instance, because school had gone on Zoom and people were doing school remotely, I was able to be present for, something maybe I wouldn't normally be. And she was doing our family tree. She was presenting that, and she was going through her Iranian side. And I was standing in the kitchen observing this from afar, really interested. And I started to spark to a memory that I had actually, I guess, completely suppressed, of when I was 8. And it was a very short memory. I was sitting in the classroom, and when this revolution in Iran took place, one of the first things they did was to separate the boys and the girls in the classroom. So these soldiers, marched into the classroom I was in, and my best friend was this girl, and they grabbed her. And as they were pulling her out, she was crying, "Reza, help me, help me." And I'm holding onto her hand, not knowing what to do, totally helpless. And that was this flash. And it, spooked me.
Yeah.
And it started this progression of memories, actually, that were much more violent and much more bloody. Things again that no child should see. And I started to physically get these intense pressure on my head, where my body would completely shut down. And if I was lucky enough to get to my wife in time to tell her what was happening, I might have a little bit of feelings and I would be okay for a little bit, but it just continually got worse. Then when I didn't know what was going on, I thought I was going crazy. And my wife had a really good description for it, which was, when she'd see it, she'd say, "Reza, you're flooding." And when the things started to first open up, we took a family road trip down to San Diego, and I was driving, and she noticed that thing happening to me. Reza, you're flooding. And I said, yeah, why don't you drive? And I was just trying to sleep. The kids were just being kids. I made a loud sound in the back. I got up very angry and, was loud. And I apologized. We pulled over, we walked around, and then we drove back to the hotel. And I just said, look, I can't go out. You guys go out to eat. I'm going to wait here at the hotel. And then the only way I can describe this is, if you perceive the world, let's say through a window, um, that window, it wasn't even a window, like a wall was shutting. So there was just this little bit of narrow light that I could look through. And I found myself waking up from what I would call a sort of blackout. I had my phone in my hand, and I guess I had pressed missed calls, and I heard the voice of a friend of mine who's a Vietnam veteran, actually.
Okay.
Reza, what's going on? What, hello, hello? And I woke up, and I was on the roof of the hotel, ready to jump. Now,
Wow.
I told him, what was happening, and he immediately knew. He said, "You're suffering from PTSD. You have severe trauma." And as soon as he said that, I melted. I've never cried like that in my life. The truth, like just hit, and everything
Yeah.
melted away. So I called a friend of mine who'd had a very horrific childhood, is this incredible person. And I said, this happened. What do I do? And she said, you need to go to this person who will help carve it out of you. And it was a very specific type of trauma therapy. But what that led me to really get in touch with little Reza, who I'm an actor, I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer, but it seemed completely ridiculous for me still to be like, I have to develop this relationship with, how is this going to go? And when I was willing to do it, because I was desperate, but I ended up, forming this relationship, and I saw, he was just this like scared little boy in this dark corner sitting there, afraid. And as we formed this communication and, getting to know him is what basically freed me from this. And it was an amazing 2.5 years of my life, this journey. But through that, these objects that you're talking about that are filled with meaning, and, one of them was a teddy bear, that I'd had. And those objects really represented, it wasn't even representing, it's what they were, was like
Yeah.
part of the childhood that was lost or glossed over in terms of, but there was a safety, and also what I was saying, before, in terms of what an 8-year-old should do and be able to do.
Yeah.
And so, part of my journey has been actually to get those same objects that I didn't and have them now, with me. And so another one is actually a picture of little Reza, that I'll look at sometimes, and we just connect on this really deep level. And I just let him know, that I'm here. I love him. He's very safe. And I can't tell you how freeing this experience has been for me. But I share this also because I've found that there are a lot of people suffering from similar things, but are afraid to kind of talk about this out loud. So, in case any of the listeners are going something, I'm always available to chat more about this process. But those are the objects that come to mind.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Riz. And it's really important how, what you're saying, it's that you kind of build stories, and there was this story of this little boy that you didn't want to see because it's a horror story. It wasn't a something good, but you had to, and it's sometimes that, and I understand what you mean. Sometimes you have to see that horror movie in order to kill that monster, in order to not kill, but maybe that monster loses its power, in a way. It's to kind of get that power out of it. So yeah, I can truly understand what you mean.
The frightened child run the show,
Exactly.
you know, because that's what was happening.
Now that you mentioned that, I remember when I was around 8 years old, I was always very scared at night, and my parents never knew how to, I always went to my parents' bed, and I was that kind of kid. And suddenly my dad's youngest brother who, tragically died when he was 20. And this, a couple of years later than this happened. But I remember he was there. He was probably about 16, 17. And he's like, why are you scared? What's this? And I'm scared of the monster. He said, don't worry about it. If any monster comes, I'll kick his butt. That, that gave me such safety. If my parents would have ever said, if any monster, acknowledge that the monsters exist. If any monster comes, we'll take care of it. And not disregarding me. So that really stood with me. That
It's beautiful because I link it to what you were sharing about the kicking butt that you really enjoyed and appreciated, in the Star Wars. And you can see a link there, Your brother was there ready to kick some butt.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Reza. Anybody else that wants to share? Stephen, Carrie, Susan?
Sure, I'll share. And I really appreciate, Reza, your deep dive and your connection to cinema through terror. I was a teacher at Ojai Valley School a little after that happened, and the owner of that theater's children came to the school, and I was their counselor. I related to them as the two kids, the two girls who liked to sit in the front row of the theater anytime we went to see Star Wars. It all connected in that way. But yeah, horrific times. And, that's the fuel, isn't it? That directs us to share solutions for our own child and for those in pain throughout the world. So it's really awesome. I'd like to go back to Star Wars and George Lucas. I was at USC when George Lucas and the gang were there, and I was a freshman, sophomore when he was a graduate student doing THX 1138 4EB. And that in 1968, that year, when he did that film with all of these Navy Signal Corps guys, we sat down in a theater and we'd seen all the films. I watched every one of his films because I would check them out. I was the one who handed out equipment to the filmmakers at USC Cinema when it was just military army barracks, basically. I would hand out his films and the other films made there, and his films were just immaculate, beautiful. Everybody liked him. He was an odd character, very skinny with a big pompadour type hairdo, like he thought he was Elvis Presley or something. Just an odd egg. And when we sat down and watched THX 1134 EB, we knew the earth had just changed. We knew that cinema had just changed. It was remarkable. And one of the things that happened that year was 2001 A Space Odyssey came out at the same time. And I remember Caleb Deschanel coming up and just describing what it was like to be in the theater, in the Cinerama theater, seeing that with some of his friends. And of course, I was very intrigued because Cinerama was my favorite format. And he was just exuding this altered state of awareness that he'd gotten into. Well, what is that thing that was informing us back there in 1968? It was this Cinerama experience of this very abstract film that had one key item in it, and that was the monolith. And that monolith was informing everything in the film and the audience ultimately, because the monolith was the screen we were watching, which is I just saw it the other day at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival with Keir Dullea, and he looked better than he looks at the end of the film. It was a great character, but it is so awesome how Kubrick laid that out. And he didn't really, Arthur C. Clarke didn't quite even know what he was doing, but Kubrick clearly knew what he was doing. And he was laying out initially, right from the beginning, the alignment of the Earth with the moon and the sun. We were invited into this experience, and that was the opening credits. And after that, it lands with the ape people turning into humans and introducing them to the concept that they can use a tool. They can create tools, and there's something powerful with tools to the extent they can control a water hole. And that informs those beings. And then the next leap, of course, is on the moon, that informs modern era that there's something beyond the moon that's informing intelligence, and then off to Jupiter moon. And, all hell breaks loose because of AI. And then ultimately back into this now transcendent, it leads the audience into a transcendent beyond words and lands him into this sort of a odd lit up French hotel room, it appears, and where each step the observer, Dave, is now watching himself die. And yet he isn't dying, because there comes the monolith again, and it introduces him to his next ultimate star child life, which was amazing, instant drama. And so that device, I think, also was informing George Lucas, who was just getting into this THX world of escaping a labyrinth of insanity, like Godard's Alphaville, just running, his character runs out into the sun, into the light. And all of that is that he's informed. The characters that are in Star Wars and the Death Star are informed by those scenes in THX. So he was growing his case that there's something bigger when you go to the light. So the lightsaber I see as a connection even to the monolith. And the lightsaber to me is a tool, not only for defense, but it has psionic and it has telekinesis powers that you can draw it to you, and it's physical, and you can definitely destroy that which is not good and that which is blocking the light, with intense light. And what is that light? Back to 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's the big screen. It's our dream world that we share together and project on walls.
Pretty nice. That's a very nice analogy, Stephen, and the way that you see it with the monolith in 2001. Thanks for sharing.
I do have something from our tutor about associating memories and meanings with objects. So
Yeah.
would you like to hear what it has to say?
Yes, please do so.
Okay, I asked, why do we associate? And it says the association of memories and meanings with particular objects stems from the way we, as conscious beings, navigate the interplay between the material and spiritual dimensions of life. Objects often serve as physical representations or symbols of experiences, relationships, and emotions that are otherwise intangible. This is deeply tied to our ability to assign significance to the world around us, a reflection of our innate desire to find meaning and connection in our lives. When we experience something deeply personal or transformative, the objects present during those moments can become imbued with the essence of that experience. For example, a photograph may capture not just an image, but the emotions, relationships, and context of a particular time, allowing us to revisit that memory whenever we see it. Similarly, a gift from a loved one carries the weight of their affection and thoughtfulness, making the object a tangible link to the relationship itself. These act as anchors, grounding our memories in the physical world and allowing us to revisit them with clarity and emotional resonance. This phenomenon also reflects the way humans use symbols to express and preserve meaning. Objects become more than their material composition, they transform into vessels of significance. For example, is not merely a piece of metal, but a profound symbol of love and commitment and shared purpose. That's why we do it, so we can recall the intensity of the experience or the meaning.
Thank you. Perfect and spot on, Susan. Thank you for doing that research.
Well, I was just thinking as Susan was reading about the wedding ring and about the cross, and there's much there to talk about for future conversation, I suppose, and even concentric circles, the heart, the peace sign. So yes, there's much worldwide that we can all recognize and that we can have conversations about.